Hi everyone. In our last video, we created a declarative action or DA from scratch. It took the form of a button on our vehicles page to create a vehicle task record. And after the record was created, we updated the list automatically to display that new record. Well, in this video, we're going to create a button that is not a declarative action and will not appear in the page's action bar. But the button will perform exactly the same operations as the DA. After the demonstration, we will briefly explain the big advantage of using a declarative action over a pure button component in UI Builder. The key word here is reusability. This new button will actually be quite easy to implement as the logic has already been implemented. We are simply adding another Workspace UI component to trigger that same logic. If you haven't watched the previous video, I invite you to do so, as some of the content in this video references what we developed in that video. So let's quickly refresh how we implemented that declarative action. First, we created the DA and the associated records to include it in an action bar. And then in UI Builder, we created an event which is triggered by clicking the button. And that event in turn triggers event handlers. And we had event handlers for creating the vehicle task record, as well as refreshing the vehicle task related list. And we did that using a combination of a client state parameter, as well as a client script. So let's get started now and create a new form button in UI Builder. All right, I've got my vehicles page open here in UI Builder. So at the bottom of this page, I'm going to add a new layout here, just a single column layout. So I'll do that. And then in that layout, I'm going to add a new component. If you type in button, you can see there's actually quite a few different buttons in the system. So I'm just going to take this standard one here, just called button. I'm going to change the label here to create vehicle tasks. So similar to the one that we were using before, but this time I'll put in brackets here, button, just to signify that this button is actually a pure button component in UI Builder. I'll keep the variant here as secondary and the size as medium, and the other properties I will leave as is as well. So if we come back to our page here and just refresh it, we can see here we've now got the create vehicle task button in the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, we could add some padding there, but I'll just leave it as is. Okay, so the next step is to specify what happens when we actually click on that button. And for that, we need to, while the button component is still selected, come over to our Events tab here, and then go to Add Handler. So we actually need to do something. And that something will be to trigger an event. And that event is the one that we created in the last video, which was to create a vehicle task record. So I'm just going to scroll down here in my list of actions here and go to the create vehicle task event and select that, and then add it, and then save the record. And that in fact is all I need to do, because in our previous video that event had in turn event handlers to actually create the record and to update the related list. So we could actually just leave it as is now, and this would work just fine. So if we come to our page here and just refresh it, just to ensure that it's taking up that latest configuration, and click on the Create Vehicle Task button now, we now have 6. And if I go to the tab here, that's the one here, number 10 down the bottom. This button also appears here as well. It's the same page essentially. So if we click it again, we get number 11. Okay, so that's it. That's all we need to do. Okay, to add another button in our UI Builder for our page to trigger the same event and the same event handlers to create the record, update the list of vehicle task records. That's it. The logic was already there. We only added another visual component, a button, to trigger that same business logic. Well, what if we wanted to do something else with that button? I mean, we still want to create a vehicle task record, but maybe a different kind of vehicle task record. There may be vehicle tasks for repair work, for maintenance, etc. So we've got to have different buttons to reflect those different properties or attributes of that same vehicle task record. So in order to do that here, I'm going to come to my client state parameters and add a few or a couple new parameters here. So the first one here, I'm going to call this short description. So maybe you can already see what we're going to do here. Depending on what button is clicked, we'll have a different value for the client state parameter that is then used to populate the new vehicle task record. So we've got our first one, short description. I'll add another one here for type and then close that. Okay, so what I'll do now, when the button is clicked, we don't want the create vehicle task event triggered first. So I'm just going to remove that. And instead, I'm going to add a new event handler to update the client state parameter. Okay. So the first client state parameter that I'll update will be short description, and I'll just put in here a repair task created via a button, just for demonstration purposes, so we're absolutely clear where this text is coming from. I'll add another handler here, again, to update another client state parameter, this time the type. In other words, a type field in the vehicle task record, but we'll give it the same name here so we know that those two correlate, the client state parameter and the field in the record itself. And then we can add a final handler here for our create vehicle task. So instead of it putting at the front and then updating client state parameters, we want to update the client state parameters first and then use that while we're creating the vehicle task. Okay, and then save that. Okay, what we'll need to do, however, is come to our body component here and then go to the event handlers for the create vehicle task event itself. So we're going to trigger that event, and that event will then in turn trigger some other event handlers. And the first one here you can see is the data resource, and that's actually the one that creates the record in the vehicle task table. So at the moment, if I come to that data resource event handler and go to my edit field values, we've hard-coded essentially the values for short description and type. So you can probably guess what we're going to do next. Now we're going to update these hard-coded values so that they instead reference the client state parameter values that we've created and set previously. So to do that, I'm going to come here and click, remove the value first and then go to bind data. So we can actually put in a dynamic value. Again, have a look at the UI Builder Fundamentals course in the Learning Portal of ServiceNow. You'll learn all about how these different components work. So I'll go to client state, and then I'll just add the short description client state. In other words, the value for a short description is going to be populated here for the short description field in my new vehicle task record. And I'll do the same thing with the type field. I'll just remove the existing value, go to bind data, come to my type client state parameter and add it instead. Okay, apply that, save the page again, and let's go ahead and test it. So we'll come back to our page here, we'll refresh it, and now if I click on the create vehicle task button, we'll have number 13 created here. And this time with a short description that reflects the client state parameter that we populated when we clicked on that button. Okay. So then if we wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, we could have a separate button for creating a repair task, another button for creating a maintenance task, however you want to implement it. It's just a very simple demonstration, but hopefully you get the idea about how we can manipulate values in for the buttons that we are clicking on. Okay, so this is how we can easily reuse existing logic in our workspace. This is made possible by separating the logic from the presentation layer. But why would we implement a button this way? Why would we not use a declarative action instead? Well, if we wanted to have just a single button or an action on the form somewhere, perhaps closer to a relevant field or somewhere else on the page that made sense, we could easily create a button using this method. And you can place a button component anywhere. But in fact, you can actually create and place an action bar component anywhere on the page as well. That's how UI Builder works. You can design your pages and put components where you want them. But if you wanted to reuse this button on different pages, maybe in different workspaces, it would be easier with a DA. Otherwise, you would need to manually recreate the button on all the relevant pages. DAs, on the other hand, once you create them, are easily reused. The easiest way to demonstrate this is to look at an existing DA, a global action that is used in multiple pages and in multiple workspaces. It's called copy URL. It appears on our form action layout already because it's a global DA. It's not specific to a specific table. Our vehicle's form action layout inherits this global declarative action. The copy URL DA can theoretically appear in any action bar for all record types. The only reason it's not at the moment for us in my vehicles page is because of a condition attached to it. What condition is that? Well, let's take a look. We'll need to navigate our way back to the DA, and we could just do this by opening the copy URL declarative action from the forms action module, but let's do it the long way instead, just to refresh our memories of the records involved in building a declarative action. So first we open up the M2M layout item record, and from there the form action layout item itself. And then we go to the UX form action record, and from there finally to the DA itself. And we can see here that the DA is restricted to the service operations view. And if we remove this view and refresh our vehicles page, the declarative action appears. Simple. So the advantage here is that we can specify various conditions, workspaces, tables, views, and if you scroll down further in the form here, there is a whole host of other conditions that we can easily tie to the declarative action. That is, we do not have to worry about the action bar configuration, the placement of the action bar, nor creating a separate button in UI Builder or the logic that is executed. Again, the logic of the DAs is separated to such an extent that simple changes like this are possible without disrupting other workspaces, other pages, and other components. So, I hope you found this demonstration helpful, and we'll see you in the next video where we will take a look at some examples of other types of declarative actions. See you then.